A target that seemed unreachable, a mission that seemed impossible. Against all odds, the British would challenge the enemy in the famous attack on the port of St Nazaire. At the beginning of 1941, Britain was the only remaining power that continued the war against the Third Reich, which at the time already controlled a vast continental portion of Europe, and kept London under constant pressure with air and naval attacks. An insular nation highly dependent on imports for its own survival, Britain was threatened with suffocation by the growing threat posed by the U-boats, the German submarines, which month after month sank a greater number of cargo ships in the Atlantic Ocean. Thus it was with vivid terror that in May the British got the news that a gigantic German war machine was trying to access the Atlantic and join the submarines in its sinking campaign, the brand new battleship Bismarck, the largest in the world by the time. The Royal Navy committed vast resources to the hunt for the Bismarck, and suffering heavy losses, only by a stroke of luck did they manage to damage the ship's rudder and sink it the next morning. The costly victory over Bismarck did not relieve the British for much time, since the submarines were still in their deadly chain of successes, and a new threat, just as worrisome, rose on the horizon. The new battleship Tirpitz, Bismarck's sister ship, had become operational and now represented the potential repetition of the events of May, and the British did not know if they could count with luck by their side a second time. On January 14, 1942, Tirpitz sailed from Wilhelmshaven towards Trondheim, in Norway, and the whole action was followed by the British intelligence services, who understood the movement as a sign of a battleship race to make way for the Atlantic. Immediately, the war cabinet planners began to think of what to do if this possibility might turn into fact, trying to deny the feasibility of the German battleship to operate in the open ocean. They realized that if the Tirpitz were to be damaged in battle in the Atlantic, it would have to be repaired on a dry dock, and there was only one dry dock on the French Atlantic coast occupied by the Germans that was large enough to accommodate the gigantic battleship, the dock located in the port of St Nazaire. St Nazaire is located on the north bank of the Loire River estuary, 400 kilometers from the nearest English port. It had two closed basins that housed 12 submarine pens, hosting 2 U-boat flotillas, but more importantly, it was home to the Normandie dry dock. The largest dry dock in the world when it opened in 1934, it was 350 meters long and 50 meters wide, being designed to house what was the world's largest transatlantic ship at the time, the SS Normandie. In early 1942, planners in London concluded that the destruction of the Normandie dry dock would prevent any German attempt to send Tirpitz to the Atlantic, since without it, the Germans would have nowhere to repair their huge ship. Therefore, the planning for this action was initiated at the Joint Operations Headquarters, under the command of Commodore Lord Louis Mountbatten, a man from the closest circle of trust of Winston Churchill. Mountbatten analyzed several possibilities for carrying out the attack, which proved to be a highly complex target. The dock was too small to be destroyed by aerial bombardment, and an area bombardment could cause heavy casualties to the civilian population of St Nazaire, which had by the time 50,000 inhabitants. The dock was located about 8 kilometers inland on the river estuary, making any attempt of naval bombardment impossible without exposing the fleet to the powerful German coastal batteries. And a torpedo attack with submarines would be useless due to the anti-torpedo nets placed at the entrance of the dock. With traditional possibilities exhausted, Mountbatten turned to the Commandos, the British Special Forces. Created after the fall of France in June 1940, the Commandos were the response to Churchill's demand for a raiding military force that could carry out attacks on targets in occupied Europe. Initially made up by army volunteers, the Commandos got strict training that emphasized extreme physical preparation and keen aggression, combined with stealthiness and skills in hand-to-hand combat. The recruits went through simulated combat with live ammunition, and only a small portion of volunteers were able to complete the training. These men would form an assault force that would be deployed by the Royal Navy fast boats to St Nazaire, where they would destroy the port's infrastructure. Even with the possibility of sustaining heavy casualties against the German garrison, Lieutenant Colonel Augustus Charles Newman's 2nd Commando Battalion accepted the challenge of leading the mission. But then an apparently insurmountable obstacle was presented. The amount of explosives needed to destroy the dry dock floodgates was immense, impossible to carry even by hundreds of commandos, setting in yet another impasse, which was only resolved with a bold and controversial idea. A destroyer would be converted to become a bomb, having its weight reduced to pass over the sands of the Loire estuary, and ram the dry dock gates, then detonating to blow up the whole structure. The unusual plan was presented to the Admiralty, who immediately refused it. The deliberate loss of a ship from the already highly committed British fleet was unacceptable, and even if it were to be carried out, in their opinion the attack would have little chance of actual success. However, the constant activity updates on the Tirpitz put pressure on the Royal Navy, and it finally decided to give up the old destroyer HMS Campbeltown for the sacrifice. Built for the United States Navy during World War I, the destroyer had been commissioned in 1919 as USS Buchanan, serving until 1939, when it was placed on reserve. But in September 1940, the Buchanan was transferred to Great Britain under the Destroyers for Bases Agreement, which provided the transfer of 50 old American destroyers to the British in exchange for bases in the Caribbean and Canada. While in service with the Royal Navy, the destroyer was renamed HMS Campbeltown and placed under the command of Captain Stephen Beatty, performing convoy escort duty across the Atlantic. The task of turning a ship into a bomb was the responsibility of Lieutenant Nigel Tibbits, a Royal Navy demolitions expert, who decided to use 24 depth charges divided into 6 niches of 4 charges, stored in a concrete repository located 3/4 of the length towards the bow. The bomb would be detonated using multiple number 10 detonators, popularly known as pencil detonators, which used acid to corrode a delayed fuse, allowing the commandos to carry out the entire attack on the port and be evacuated before the explosion. In the end, Campbeltown became a bomb with 4.5 tons of explosives. In early March 1942, HMS Campbeltown set sail from the port of Portsmouth towards Plymouth, where it would undergo extensive modification in an intense period of just 10 days. In addition to the installation of the explosive charge, the destroyer had all its internal non-vital components removed and had 2 of its 4 chimneys removed and the other 2 cut at an angle to make the silhouette similar to a German destroyer. Received a naval 76mm cannon in the bow and 8 12mm Ehrlichon anti-aircraft cannons mounted in the upper deck, as well as extra armor to protect the bridge. Other elements of the naval force selected for the action, now officially designated Operation Chariot, included the destroyers HMS Tynedale and Atherstone, who would escort the attack force and provide cover for the evacuation, as well as a torpedo boat and a gunboat, on which would be the commander of the operation, Captain Robert Ryder. The commando force, a total of 265 men, would be divided into 3 separate groups, one aboard the Campbeltown and the other 2 divided into 16 coastal patrol boats Fairmile B, which each received a twin-millimeter cannon in addition to their 2 Lewis machine guns. The plan foresaw that after Campbeltown rammed the dock gates, the boats would disembark the commandos along the pier near the jetty and the old entrance to the basin, so that they would then destroy the pump house and all of the infrastructure possible. The port was defended by 5,000 German soldiers, and the British intelligence knew that they would be met with heavy resistance, greatly decreasing the men's chances of survival. Upon learning that this rumor was already circulating among the commandos, Lord Mountbatten gathered them in a courtyard and announced that any man who wanted to give up the mission at that moment could leave, without any prejudice or punishment. All of them facing him, none of the commandos moved. To lessen the potential reaction from the German garrison in St Nazaire, the RAF would bomb the facility just before the attack, but fearing that such an action could cause high civilian casualties, Churchill ordered that the aircraft should only bomb if there was full target visibility. On the morning of March 26, Colonel Newman led his men on board the vessels, and at 2 p.m. the fleet set sail from the port of Falmouth, in Cornwall, heading south for the French coast. At 2 a.m. on March 27th, while passing off the coast of Brittany, the force was sighted by the German submarine U-593, and after a quick exchange of fire, the U-boat submerged. Shortly thereafter, the German skipper, Captain Lieutenant Gerd Kelbling, radioed the position of the British to his headquarters, putting the entire operation at risk. But because they were sailing south, the German West Command Chief of Staff, General Karl Hilpert, dismissed the warning, thinking the vessels were just heading for Gibraltar. The next morning, the British were also spotted by 2 French fishing trawlers, and Ryder ordered the fishermen captured and their boats sunk to avoid any risk of information leakage. At 9 p.m., the convoy reached the point 120 kilometers west of St Nazaire and changed course towards the river estuary. Leaving destroyers Tynedale and Atherstone behind, Ryder's gunboat took the lead of the formation, paving the way for the Campbeltown. In the destroyer, Captain Beatty ordered the raising of a German naval ensign on the mast, in an attempt to deceive the port watchman. As the ships approached, at 11:30 p.m. 62 RAF bombers flew over the port, but as they found a dense cloud cover, they followed Churchill's order and did not drop their bombs. Amid the sounding alarm and the frantic movement of the German searchlights, Captain zur See Karl-Conrad Mecke, commander of the 22nd Kriegsmarine Flak Regiment, noted the strange behavior of the aircraft and issued an alert to all of the port defenses. From that moment on, every German weapon in St Nazaire nervously awaited an enemy action. At 0:30 a.m. on March 28, the English formation entered the Loire estuary. Navigating through the middle of the river, they initially managed to avoid detection, but at 1:22 a.m. the force was suddenly illuminated by spotlights on both banks, and a port side light beacon began to demand their identification. Beatty then ordered a response, using an identification code of a German vessel captured in Norway, but after a few nervous minutes of suspense, the German batteries suddenly opened fire on the raiding vessels. Upon realizing that the cover had been broken, Beatty lowered the German flag and ordered the Royal Navy ensign to be raised on the mast of the Campbeltown. Upon realizing the new flag, all German batteries still holding fire poured a barrage of projectiles over the formation, which dispersed in the water. As it approached the floodgates, Campbeltown was targeted by an immense variety of weapons, killing the helmsman with a direct hit. Lieutenant Tibbits then took the helm in the midst of a chaotic scenario on the bridge, in which Beatty was trying to make sure he hit the right target, even though he was blinded by the spotlights. The captain then increased the speed, while Ryder, aboard the gunboat, made a sharp starboard return, leaving an open path for the destroyer to reach the dock. On the Campbeltown bridge, Beatty felt the ship cutting through the anti-torpedo nets that protected the target, and with Tibbits firmly keeping the course, he alerted the crew for impact. At 1:34 a.m., HMS Campbeltown crashed into the dry dock gates, its keel cutting the central portion of the structure, piercing 10 meters into the target, just 4 minutes after the scheduled time. The Commandos disembarked from the destroyer organized in 3 ways. Assault teams meant to open the way, demolition teams responsible for planting the explosives, and protection teams in charge of protecting the demolition men. Captain Donald Roy, sporting a Scottish kilt, commanded the first assault team on land, targeting the machine gun nests above the pump house and securing the bridge that controlled the access to the dock area. Even amid a tremendous crossfire of machine guns, rifles and mortars, and suffering heavy losses that in some teams reached half of the men, the Commandos managed to achieve their goals, blowing up the pump house and establishing control of the bridge. Colonel Newman, who was aboard the gunboat and didn't have to come ashore, asked Ryder to leave him on the bank, and from there he directed mortar fire to destroy a machine gun posted on the roof of the submarine pens, which was causing heavy casualties to his men. He then kept the coordination of local defenses, luring the attention of several enemy weapons towards him. However, the 2 other commando groups inside the patrol boats suffered catastrophic losses from the start. Almost all of the fragile wooden vessels were destroyed in their approach, and only 2 boats managed to land their men on the pier. The scene on the Loire estuary was now a hellish sight for Colonel Newman, who saw the Fairmiles, the means of evacuation of his commandos, all burning in the water. Realizing that the route was no longer feasible, he then gathered the remaining 100 men and ordered, "Commandos, we are on our own now. Do your best to return to England. Do not surrender until your ammunition is depleted, and only surrender if there's no other way." The Commandos then disengaged from the dock area and headed south to the bridge that crossed the new basin entrance. With the Germans firing from the other side, they moved forward with their Thompsons blazing, opening their way for the city. Upon reaching the other side, the British dispersed. managing to infiltrate several blocks, but the vast majority were eventually captured. Only 5 men managed to evade the enemy's siege, and after being helped by the French resistance, were able to cross the Spanish border and reach Gibraltar. Having managed to flee to the Atlantic, boat 306, which had Sergeant Thomas Durrant operating the Lewis machine guns, was attacked at close range by the German torpedo boat Jaguar. And despite the clear advantage of firepower, Durrant remained steadfast in his weapon. Even after his body had been pierced dozens of times by German machine guns and been summoned to surrender, the sergeant did not yield, and only when his ammunition ran out did the Germans approach the vessel, finding him on the verge of death. The Jaguar commander, Korvettenkapitän Friedrich-Karl Paul, met Colonel Newman the next morning and said to him, "I don't know who was the man shooting at us from that boat, but he should certainly get your Victoria Cross." Based on Paul's recommendation, and along with Sailor William Savage, who died defending Ryder's boat, Sergeant Thomas Durrant was posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross, Britain's highest honor for bravery. Early the next morning, the port of St Nazaire was on fire, and the men who had managed to escape were heading home. However, the attack had been costly in casualties, with 169 men killed and 215 captured by the Germans. The Commandos had destroyed the pump house and seriously damaged the entrance to the basin and the gate of the dry dock, but the Germans, impressed by the boldness of the raid, were now trying to understand why the British had risked so much to cause so little damage, since Campbeltown was still in the same place, stuck in the wreckage. The detonators had not exploded at the scheduled time, and now the prisoners were wondering if the bomb had completely failed. Several military and civilians were already approaching to investigate the destroyer, unaware of the bomb inside. That was when, at 10 a.m., a violent explosion rocked the whole harbor, and the giant bomb in the Campbeltown completely destroyed the dry dock floodgates, instantly killing more than 300 people. The damage to the dry dock was so extensive that repairs had not been completed by the end of the war, definitely preventing the battleship Tirpitz from attempting to reach the Atlantic. Adolf Hitler was dismayed by the result of the operation and dismissed General Hilpert for not paying attention to the sighting of the British fleet the day before. As a result, the defense of French ports were strengthened, and orders were issued to erect the fortifications that would become known as the Atlantic Wall. Despite the extremely high number of casualties, Operation Chariot was considered a success, and its result made headlines around the world, becoming the single action that most earned Victoria Crosses in World War II. In addition to the 2 gunners killed, Captain Ryder, Captain Beatty, and Colonel Newman were also awarded the medal. The Royal Navy's ingenuity and the Commandos' boldness made the attack on St Nazaire popularly known as the greatest raid of all, and immortalized the image of the British Special Forces as a fearless force, capable of carrying out even the most impossible achievements in the name of final victory. Hey there, I'm glad you followed the video to the end. If you enjoyed this content, please consider subscribing. This channel will have new content for you every week, and I promise you, you will enjoy the next ones.